This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks NYC. I have the pleasure of bringing an Integrity Square consulting client for a weekend, the owner of Razor Sharp Fit, Jacob Thomas. Good to have you on the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Awesome. So as background here, Jacob and I met through Rex Roundtable Eddie Talk on a Friday. I believe he closed the deal on a Monday or Tuesday. We spent Saturday and Sunday making sure he was ironclad. Documents were good, financials were set, and it was a check the box good deal that he could tell his significant other that we are going into business and we're not looking back. So want to talk about that today.
Looking forward to it. It was quite a roller coaster that we had that weekend.
Yeah, I think every deal's a roller coaster. So give us your background, how long you worked at Razor Sharp, how this kind of evolved over time, and then some of the trust and relationships you built up that basically allowed you to find a pathway to do this.
Yeah. So first I started in the fitness industry right after college. Back when I was athletic training and I had a real passion for kids and training athletes. And so found a place called Forward Fitness. I had a Parisi Speed School. That's really kind of where, I really started everything there. And then had the opportunity to work over at MVP Sports Clubs in Michigan. Did that for 5 years, running sports performance companies inside of clubs over there, and had a blast doing it. Was ready to move back home and found Razor Sharp Fitness from there and started as the fitness director back in 2013. So I started in that role, did that for 1 year, and then got bumped up to the general manager role and was in that role for 8.5 years. And then, as we were going through the journey of being here, I was really interested in what the next step for me was. And hopefully it was either in the business. But if it wasn't in the business, I wanted to know that and what potentially to look for outside of that. So probably about 5 years ago, in kind of our year-end meeting with Mike and Terry, the owners of the club, I sat down and I asked that question. What does it look like for you guys? What are you thinking? They were about to be empty nesters and, starting to, so I would think about, potentially, looking at retiring or not wanting to run the gym fully and those kind of things. So I just wanted to start that discussion, and we had a really candid conversation about, hey, right now isn't necessarily the time we're looking at that. But ultimately they said in the next 2 years was really going to start taking shape of what their plans might be and where they were going to go. So I was really excited to at least that they, already were willing to talk to me about that. And so sure enough, 2 years later, sat down, had another conversation, and they started bringing up, hey, what we're thinking is they own the building and the business. And so they were like, the first thing that we're probably looking at doing is potentially selling the building. And so we just wanted to give you a heads up on that. But then after that point, we'll probably be looking at the business side of it as well. Some interesting discussions that we had is the fact that, could we sell the building to a bigger player that maybe wanted the business as well, a bigger health club that would be interested in that kind of investment. And we did some discussions and some outreach in regards to that. And nothing really came to fruition from that side. So it really went just strictly selling the business, selling the building first. And with that, they got a really significant bite. Somebody was very interested in October of 21. And so they were like, hey, here we go. We're starting to go down this path and you'll see some people coming through and so on and so forth. And by the time February came, they're like, we're probably going to have an LOI coming in here shortly for the building. And now we really want to look at what it takes to sell the business next. And at that point, for me, I didn't necessarily have a huge ambition to be an owner. Full transparency, I enjoy working for somebody else, and I have for a long time. And Mike and Terry really took great care of me during that. But what I saw was at least to know what it looked like and what it meant. And so,
so the deal with the real estate got done.
The real estate still is not done. Nope.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I was like, well, I'd love to know just what it takes to potentially buy the business. And so they're like, oh, well, we would love to, be able to have you do that. We just weren't sure if that was an option and so on and so forth. So So sure enough, sat down. Go ahead.
Let me stop you for a second. So the owners of the club also own the real estate. Obviously, they could layer in a much higher rent and basically capture a lot of the EBITDA of the club. That would put you as the ultimate owner in a very risky position because you would not have as much cushion or profitability to actually meet the rent payments and also manage the business. So as that was going down the path of, hey, what are we going to do and change our lease agreements to maximize the ultimate value of the real estate? How much were you involved with that? Were you kind of privy to, we could kind of move a couple of nuts to this side instead of this side? And, how did that go?
It was interesting. So I feel like I was kind of a little bit a part of the discussions in the past. So I had an idea of what some of the other leases look like because there's there's 3 other spaces inside the building that we rent out as well. So I had some just some insider information, but ultimately, they kind of created what the new lease was going to look like. And ultimately, for me, it was I needed to make sure one that I hired somebody to be able to take a look at it for me and understand what that looked like. Because I didn't understand it. It was my first time really diving into that kind of stuff. On the other side of that coin, especially with how long I worked with them, I also had faith and trust that they were going to try to work really hard to make sure that it was a successful thing for me. But I had to go right and find a lawyer that could dissect it and really figure out what it meant and how it looked. But they created it, and we really didn't make from getting a lawyer and dissecting it more. We really didn't make many changes to it at all because again, they really did a great job of trying to set it up to be successful for me.
That's great. So fast forward, real estate's still out there. Big fish goes away. I tell people that the first buyer that shows up is probably not the one that's going to close. You're going through a beauty contest, shopping. Somebody says they got the capital. They're all rah-rah, and then they somehow mysteriously disappear, either at the closing table. They couldn't get the financing. Something happens with one of their family members. I got a list of at least the top 100 excuses on why people don't close deals that they say they've got committed capital for. Maybe that's a book, or maybe that's just a depressing, one pager that I put together on 2-sided white paper. So now you're working there. You're also now a buyer of the business. So you're kind of on the other side of the table, yet obviously it's very amicable. They are trusting their baby, and basically giving it to you. They also want to get a fair price, but they also don't want to take advantage of you. So there's a lot of personal dynamics that are going on in a business negotiation, especially with someone that's internal. And also, if you don't get the deal done, you're still an employee, and you got to kind of dust that off and say, hey, are we losing our franchise player by trying to go down this path? And if it doesn't work, how's he going to feel about it? Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about the process. You got a lawyer, what kind of diligence you did before you and I did, a 48-hour crash course. You obviously knew where any bodies were buried, if there were any. So there wasn't anything in diligence that would be something you didn't pick up on or didn't see or have a hand in. So just walk us through, for an entrepreneur or somebody who's a GM saying, hey, I'm going to go down this path. I got to be careful, but here's kind of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it.
Well, I think the first step for me was really making sure I understood the books and the open book policy as soon as I could. And obviously it takes time for owners to be able to trust and make sure that people are not going to take advantage of that knowledge and information. But after about 5 or 6 years, they really opened the books to me. We had, year-end discussions of what that looked like, but that really was the stepping stone in regards to understanding what it looked like. And so from, again, building that relationship, building the trust that you can have that discussion with them was probably the number one starting point for me to make the negotiation go much smoother.
How long did that process take, just so people know that this doesn't happen in 30 days?
That's a great question. So, I mean, from a trust standpoint, it starts immediately. It's, I think one thing that my owners would say about me was, I treated this place like it was mine, and put my heart and soul into it at all times. And I was really honest with them, even in the job interview, that, buying a business and starting a business is extremely risky. And, they are hiring me to make them more money and have the business be successful. And that meant a lot to me to be able to do that. So it starts with that attitude and that thought process all the time. And even though you're working for somebody else, it's your opportunity to show that you're worth that. And then you never know the opportunities that can come, I think, from that side. So, but then on top of that, then I was asking the questions. I just kept saying, hey, the decisions that we're making, I'm not sure that we're making that these decisions are making positive changes on the business, because I'm not seeing what that bottom line is. I'm not understanding it. And so I want to make sure that the decisions I make are truly driving the business in the right direction. And I think that's ultimately the ultimate discussion that we had that got it over to the other side of opening those books to me.
And from the time that you started having the conversation till closing, how many months was that?
4 months.
4 months. Okay, that's a pretty short period of time, versus most deals. So once ownership changed on that Monday, talk about, without disclosing names, some of the financing that you were able to put together, which was basically the equivalent, I'd say, of getting a loan from your father or your uncle, and how that transpired.
Yeah. So, the first one that it came from was, it just started having just letting people know, hey, this is what we're thinking about, some trusted people that I had. And sure enough, there was somebody that my wife and I have trained for, really since I started here. And ultimately, I brought it up to them, and they said, we really believe in you. We want you to be successful, and you're a really important part of this community. And with that, this is something that we'd be interested in supporting you on. And so, we sat down, kind of talked about what the numbers look like. They had their own CPA get in it and really take a look at it. I went out and found a CPA that really, focused specifically on these acquisitions, business acquisitions. And so we kind of put those numbers together and those two sides together and had a great discussion on that. And ultimately, we decided that X percentage, that they would go all the way to X percentage of the deal. And I had to find the rest of it. It was and I told them that's what I wanted. I wanted some skin in the game myself, as best I could, even though, again, this was kind of a out of nowhere, I can't say I can afford it myself by any means, kind of situation. So we agreed on that. And so it was my opportunity to kind of find the rest of the way. And I brought that to my owners, and told them, I said, hey, I have a great opportunity. One that kind of, again, came out of nowhere too. I'm trying to find the rest of the way to get there. And so they sat, talked together, and came back the next day and said, we want to help you the rest of the way.
Gotcha.
And so from both sides of it, from an investor, and the investor really wanted, nothing in the business, solely was to support me. They don't want anything back except for a personal loan. And then my owners did a owner finance loan, to kind of complete the rest of that deal. So, a true blessing, in regards to finding people that, want support and continue to live on, what the business has already been in the community.
Yeah. So for those out there who are trying to buy a company and maybe don't have all the financing lined up, getting a seller note from the seller, basically they're taking back a piece of debt that would be subordinated or below, whether a bank loan or an SBA loan. And they usually at an interest rate that's actually lower than market, because they're trying to get themselves out of the business, not burden the new buyer with financial stress. And especially in this kind of instance where you're in the community, it's their baby that they started. They want to make sure it's successful and that their succession plan works. So those are typically pieces of the puzzle when you're doing a deal. Talk for a minute about Rex Roundtable and how that network has been beneficial to you prior to the deal, and then also now, being able to meet with other CEOs and share best practices and metrics.
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest things is, we talked about the open book policy with my owners and I. I had some frustrations that were going on with that because I felt like I was making decisions and I didn't know where it was going. And Eddie got on a phone call with my owners and just had a conversation with them and kind of helped, see that big picture with them and even gave them some strategies on, hey, this is how you can start that process, start trusting them with it, and then kind of see where it goes. And honestly, that was a huge change in regards to the business overall, me personally, and then my owners too, and their ability to be able to trust somebody and give that opportunity to them. So, the Rex Roundtable has been a place that one for, the networking and all that kind of stuff, but people that can come to bat for you, see the big picture, and be willing to have a voice for you. And Eddie was somebody that jumped in immediately for that. That really was a game changer for me. And then, since that time, I was in the Rex GM group when it started back in, I think it was 2017. I was with that group for 5 years, and it was phenomenal. And that's what I was working in every day. But since that time, now switching over to the ownership role, I've moved over to an owners group in the Rex OMS group.
Congratulations!
Thank you. They're a great, phenomenal group to be part of, and so different. Things we're talking about are different, looking at, and I'm in a great group that's they're looking to grow and do some amazing things all the time. But they're a sounding board nonstop for ideas, but even more so for this. What am I looking at? What are my finances? How do I understand how to break off because we have two clubs, each of our two different clubs, to make sure they're completely separate financially and all of that. So it's a remarkable organization to be a part of, and truly the people in it make it even better.
That's great. So the last question I want to ask you is about, you're owning this club. You got people in Rex Roundtable that have private equity capital. They might say to you, hey, Jacob, I'm doing, 15 stores this year. Next year, I'm doing 25. You've been a pillar of that club for a long time. You've been, in the community. How do you define your own success and also balance, hey, I don't want to be on the road. That sounds awesome that you're building 12 clubs. You've also been on 6 flights. You missed all your kids' games. You got issues at home. You look like you're not as healthy as you should be. So speak to the people that are listening to say, this is what I'm doing. This is my life's work. I don't need to go do a private equity deal. I don't need to go and build 50 clubs in states and cities I've never been to, and I don't care to be there. And, how you think about yourself as an entrepreneur and how you define that.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it really starts even from going back to the GM time, where again, I enjoyed working for somebody else. I didn't necessarily need to be, the owner in those kind of things. I worked hard and they gave me phenomenal flexibility and, ability to be at the kids' games and travel to Rex Roundtables and go to URSAs and do all these really cool things. But then also be really, really balanced with that. And so, I think for me, what now being a club owner has done is it allows me to continue to do those things, which I love doing, but how I can start empowering my team to be able to do that. The closer I am to my team and the more people that I can affect that way, I think that's my calling. And I think that's my passion is to continue to grow people. And the more, again, I think the closer I am to them in these two clubs and being able to be here, every day and put my stamp and my culture on that along with my wife. I think that's what I live for and what we love to do on an everyday basis. So, having a mom and pop 2 club operation is a really great place for us to be and what we love being a part of.
That's great. Final question. Has the relationship with other employees changed? Has it, do you kind of hold people to a different standard? Do you have to kind of come down on them? How is that being an owner? Obviously, you're in a higher level Rex Roundtable hierarchy, but how do you feel when you walk in?
It's a great question. For me, I try to have it be like something that hasn't changed. I think it probably has, But because I was so ingrained in it for so long, I hired every single employee that's here, except for maybe a couple that had a little bit longer tenure than I did. And so I've been their leader and been the driving force, I think, for a lot of that time. And so I think with that, I try to keep that same, my goal is to keep it the same way, that we continue to develop our culture in our direction. I don't know that we're even done with that yet. And we're still, almost a year into this. And that we're still talking about, how our culture is different and has changed and how we continue to make it better. But I will say, maybe not necessarily from the employee side as much, probably hasn't changed. But from every once in a while, the member side of it's different. You make big changes in the club. We did a redesign, or we've, changed hours, or, done anything like that.
Yeah, you don't have any plausible deniability anymore.
Right. Right. I
Here.
can't be like, oh, the owners told me that I had to do
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And so, those are now really personal conversations. And some things I've really had to work hard on is not to take things so personally, because it's truly not just because you made that decision. Really, your team made it, the business made it. It was the best for what that is, and not necessarily always going to please every single person when you make those decisions. But that's been a tougher one for me at times with this endeavor. You put, like, whether it's money, whether it's planning and that into things, and kind of sometimes the responses that you get, especially ones from unfamiliar territories.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, congratulations. We look forward to big things out of the two clubs. Introducing formally on Halo Talks, Jacob Thomas, owner, operator, and rock star. So good to see you, bro. Glad this worked out. Stamp of approval, and keep waving the Rex and the Halo flag.
Thank you, Pete. It was a blast.
Awesome talking to you, buddy.